Hello survivors and welcome to First Aid Spray, a Resident Evil podcast by fans for fans. This is episode 32, and in this edition we take a long overdue look at Leon's great big European adventure, usually known as Resident Evil 4. My name is Cyniac, you can just call me Cy, and joining me on the panel this week, like a trained animal, sometimes the only way to get his attention is to point and yell, Aliastar! From Cereal Box 64, it's Jordan Sugru.
Hi folks.
He can roll you a perfect charisma saving throw, but QuickTime events on a keyboard and mouse prove just a little bit trickier. It's Moist Outlet, aka James.
Hello.
My right hand may not come off, but he does wield a mean red 9. It's Fire Button Steve Valance.
Thank you.
With enough explosives in his inventory to kill Sadler and everyone that he goes to bingo with, it's Explosive A, Boy Wonder Adam.
Hey guys.
This episode of First Aid Spray, like all others, was recorded live on our Discord server. Enter our little world of survival horror now to hear the show early and unedited, as well as join our wonderful community and keep up to date with all of the latest news. You can find a link to the server, as well as all of our social media profiles at our website, faspraypod.com. You can also help the show by checking out our merch, or by supporting us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month, with various tiers, each with their own perks. Head over to patreon.com/faspraypod for a full list and a chance to create bonus First Aid Spray content. Housekeeping on this episode is... Actually, there's quite a lot going on in the transitional period from 2020 to 2021. First of all, thank you to our latest Patreon supporter, World War Phil. Thank you to you for supporting the show and keeping us afloat. Very much appreciated. So we've been streaming a little bit. We did the second birthday celebration stream at the beginning of December, as we talked about quite a lot. You can relive that now over on our YouTube. Both parts of us playing through Resident Evil 2 1998 is out there to rewatch at your pleasure. You can also go back and watch our Christmas special if you missed it. It's a bit out of season now, I suppose, but that was a good time. Adam wrote a wonderful little script and we all took part in it. Something a little bit different and a little bit goofy. So the Christmas special is on there, as is a much more serious video. Our most recent editorial is a lore-focused video on Blue Umbrella, the mysterious company that you see at the end of RE7. We delved into the history of that company because there's little bits of information dotted here and there in supplemental materials. So that's been strung together. Look back at what is a really interesting piece of lore and covers a lot of missing gaps. Blue Umbrella need their time in the sun, so if you don't quite understand the history of that company, would recommend that one, definitely. There's always new stuff happening on our YouTube, so do subscribe, youtube.com/First Aid Spray podcast. The Metal Gear Solid bonus episode is out now for Patreons, has been for a couple of weeks. It'll be coming out publicly at the end of January, but if you want to hear that right now, go and support us on Patreon. $5 a month will get you all of the bonus episodes early, as well as our Dawn of the Dead podcast, which is the latest poll winner. We'll be talking about the George A. Romero classic original and the 2004 remake. We'll be recording that sometime in the next few weeks or so, and as always, Patreons will get that one exclusively early. And rounding it back out on Twitch to finish as well, we are doing more streams recently, including I have been playing Resident Evil 2, the board game, live on Twitch, attempting to get through absolutely all of it, core game, B-files, all the expansions. We're going to try and go through it, probably streaming once or twice a week. So make sure you follow us on Twitch to be notified when that goes on, because that'll probably just be one of these things that floats around depending on when I'm available. But I'm going to try and stream as much as possible to get through that as well. That's all of the housekeeping out of the way. Let's move on to the Biohazard news.
So our first and only bit of news this week, I hope I pronounced these names right, Sammy Azero and Josh Cruddas have been added to the Resident Evil film cast as Enrico Marini and Ben Bertolucci, respectively.
Somewhat of a surprise, I think.
Any of these guys, I've got to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with either of them. I think they are, I guess, in a way, not to sound mean, but sort of relative unknowns, which is nice. Nice to see some fresh faces. But also, what was striking to me is just the fact we're still getting cast announcements, right? It's getting crazy now how many characters are getting shoved into this thing.
I mean, I thought they'd finished filming. I thought that was the thing they'd said.
I think they have. These are probably, post-shoot announcements.
Yeah.
Is anybody aware of either of these actors at all?
Nope.
No. Holy cow.
Well, okay, well then definitely relative unknowns.
I'm looking forward to seeing their debut in the Resident Evil universe.
Yeah, same.
I mean, the fact we've got Enrico and Ben are pretty deep cuts as it is. If not the fact we don't know what the actors are like, we at least know these characters are in it.
Yeah,
I mean Lisa Trevor's going to be in it. That's pretty deep cut there.
Yeah,
so.
again, just there's so much there. Stuff that you could think that if you're going to try and tell the story of the first two games, which is what it looks like it's going to be, there's stuff that you can cut around there that you don't have to show. You can not include Lisa Trevor technically. You could imply, Bravo team, but not really show them. So I didn't really expect to get an Enrico casting at all. I said this in the server though. The guy that they cast is quite young. Doesn't really, at least in his picture that I've seen of him, perhaps he's grown a moustache for the role and stuff, but he doesn't scream Enrico from the games to me, but I'm actually kind of okay with that, because if this is going for a remake looking style, as we saw from the set photos, so it kind of maybe it will fit better with that sort of look and that sort of version of the universe. And yeah, Ben, another character that they could have skirted around, really don't really need to include him, especially with how lacking in screen time he has in Remake 2. But it's cool that he's there nonetheless.
Is it?
Yeah, well, we might get to see his head explode on a big screen now. I don't know.
I can't wait.
I'm starting to have issues.
It's going to get a little bit worrying if they keep adding new names every week.
I mean, how long is this movie going to be?
That's my concern.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's like 12 characters so far, which is already a lot for a movie. You have to assume some of them are going to be like one and done.
Right. Yes.
It's Richard Aiken. Oh, he's dead. We didn't even hear his name or whatever. It's.
Yeah.
I don't
almost
know.
Certainly.
It's starting to become worrisome for me.
I mean, it could be a case of the teasing cast, and these people are actually just dead on the floor when we see them anyway. They're not actually
right.
Yeah.
It's a way of saying, look, who's your favorite characters in the movie, Capcom Resident Evil fan. They were dead before the film even started, but
Here's a weird one for you though, of what a reference to make. Sometimes they'll shoot films with characters in mind and then cut the scenes, just because it's unwieldy. Like you say, the length might get out of hand. I know they did that with Harry Potter with Peeves the Ghost. They shot with an actor and everything, and then it got cut. It was Rick Mayall, I think, and then it never got used. So it is. Let's hope that's not the case in a way for these actors who both seem quite passionate about being part of that universe. If nothing else, I guess it's a good sign that the people in charge of this film understand the lore, know the characters, and maybe it's just a way to build hype. Look, we've even cast an Enrico and a Ben.
I guess so. It's weird. If you look at the guy who's playing Leon, though, there's nothing to me. It's just I don't know. He looks nothing like Leon S. Kennedy. He's Canadian, but he looks South American.
I mean, let's be honest. The Resident Evil franchise doesn't know what Leon S. Kennedy looks like.
That's fair.
It has curtains. That's about all they remember.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in some degree we'll find out soon enough. We'll probably get a trailer early summer, I think. But obviously it depends on what the plan for the release schedule is and whether that moves depending on with the situation with cinemas and stuff and streaming services this year. But it'll be interesting to see when we get that first look, definitely. That'll help us get a clearer picture, I think.
I just have to temper my expectations.
I mean, to be fair...
I think that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Resident Evil film. It's not got a lot to live up to.
Right.
Just watch as much as you can stand of the final chapter first, and then you'll be well away.
That's a good idea.
Not all of the thing, because you want to end it. You want to watch the next film. Just as much as you can stomach.
Sai, we could have just watched the last movie. How dare you put us through the entire thing?
I suppose,
I'm leaving.
Yep. Oh, well, it's done now. Okay, well, that is all of the news, basically, which is probably a good thing because we've got quite a lot to talk about, one of the most important games in the franchise, so stay tuned for our discussion on Resident Evil 4. And now, reading the file info on Ashley Graham from Resident Evil 4, Mitch Zander, who you can follow on Twitter at MitchZanderVA.
Name, Ashley Graham. Age, 20. Daughter of the United States President. She was kidnapped by an unidentified group on her way home from the university. The kidnapper's motives are still unknown, although there's reliable information that the perpetrator is an insider. Only a handful of people know about this kidnapping. It's been kept under wraps, mostly due to the fact that we can't determine who the traitor is. The guys in intelligence say they have reliable information that Ashley's been sighted somewhere in Europe. But until we find out who the insider is, I don't know what to believe. It could be a ploy. We have very few leads as to the whereabouts of Ashley. But members of the Secret Service and anyone related to Ashley are being questioned by an investigative team. Even active agents are being investigated for any information. It's just a matter of time before the kidnapper is exposed.
So here we are. It is time to talk about Resident Evil 4, without doubt one of the most controversial subjects we'll ever discuss, but perhaps the biggest game in the series. Almost certainly it's right up there with the original in terms of public appearances and legendary status. It's quite a lot to unpack. So starting right at the beginning, as we often do, and perhaps this is going to be one for the most of interesting stories. I love hearing the first reaction stories, but RE4 is going to have some classics, definitely. So, Adam, what was your first reaction to RE4 when you got it in your hands and you played it for the first time way back 16 years ago?
I was just blown away by it. You know, there's a reason it has the kind of legacy it has. It's easy to look at it nowadays and kind of be like, oh yeah, you know, we've seen loads of games like this, but this was the game that made loads of games like this. So it was a completely new experience, and especially for the kind of the time when it came out, there wasn't, you know, like GameCube did a really good thing of like somehow looking like better than a lot of other systems. Which is funny because when we think of Nintendo, we don't always think of like, oh, it looked really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it, you know, obviously Remake looked astonishing and kind of still does. And Resident Evil 4 was kind of the same. It's hard to think about now because there's been so many ports. So we've all played it in like HD. So it kind of blurs the lines of how good it actually maybe looked back on GameCube. But I just remember being like totally blown away by it. It just kind of was this game that I think I played it start to finish, then I restarted it immediately. And I think I did that about 4 times. I just played it through and then restarted it and played it through. I was just like amazed by that game. It's, you know, it's my favorite Resident Evil game, and I know a lot of people are like, oh, 4 is kind of where it went off the rails, but we can kind of talk about that a bit later. I've got a few opinions on that. But yeah, first opinion on this game was just like, it kind of made me fall. It was at a point where I wasn't playing many games, and it kind of made me fall back in love a bit with video gaming. That's
fantastic. Steve, what was your first reaction to RE4? Did you get it on GameCube as well? Did you wait to the PS2?
I did. I'm going to tell you a little story now. Back. It was 2005, right? I'm not going crazy. I'm not going insane.
Yeah, that sounds right.
It was, yeah. So young Steve, much like older Steve, was occasionally a rule breaker and someone who has a bit of disrespect for authority because he is a hashtag bad boy. And RE4 cost me my job. I was already on thin ice as it was at Sainsbury's. And I bunked off work. They found out I was just faffing around with a video game. And when I went back in after the weekend, I was shooting both barrels and I couldn't defend myself, so I just walked out. So 6 of one, half a dozen the other. I lost my job because of RE4.
But
it was fun. But I can't say it wasn't worth it because RE4 to me then, and you know me now to an extent, like. I was blown away by it, and like Adam says, the graphics are phenomenal. The gameplay is really, really different to say it's just, if you look at mechanics, it's a camera change and an aiming change. And yeah, the first weekend I had a blast. I was confused because I'd been watching like all the pre-release trailers and hype, but I hadn't like been reading into it. Like I hadn't realized I actually scrapped game after game after game. I was expecting, when's the blimp going to show up? When's the hook mountain going to show up? Stuff like that, and then never happened. Yeah, it was a surreal time. Like obviously, I got in serious trouble with my mum over this game, but that's ancient history now. We're good. I have a good Resident Evil game. Sainsbury's can go fuck itself.
She didn't know it was going to lead to a successful podcasting career.
No, she didn't. So yeah, conflicting and confusing memories for this game, but generally a good time. Came with some family arguments.
That's brilliant. James, what was your first experience with RE4?
Resident Evil 4 is the first Resident Evil I ever played, and then I didn't play any other Resident Evil until I played it with you guys.
That's what I thought.
With Steve. It was I bought. Oh, so it's okay. Set the scene. It's Christmas time. Okay. I just got paid, and I really wanted a Nintendo Wii. Okay, but they're constantly out of stock. I go to Choices Videos. Okay, they're not around anymore. I go to Choices Videos. They're the only ones that have a Wii. I go, how many Wiis you got? They say, we've got 3 more Wiis in stock. And I'm like, okay, but you have to buy 4 games with it. And I'm like, okay, sure. Yeah, great. I'll go bust to get a Wii. So I choose what I want, and I choose for no random reason other than the front cover looks freaking amazing. Resident Evil 4, Tomb Raider, Anniversary, and a couple of Wii games. And I got home and I played Resident Evil 4, and it was the best thing ever. It was like, wow, what is this technology in 2005 or 6 or whatever, right? It was great. Yeah, and I had a blast with it. And I was like, wait, this isn't what I remember from the first hour of playing Resident Evil 3. This is completely different, right? What's happened to Resident Evil since Resident Evil 3? But I really, really enjoyed it. And yeah, I played that game quite a few times back in that year. Yeah, and then, but I'm going to be talking about mostly about my experience with the keyboard and mouse. But I still think that the Nintendo Wii version is so freaking good. And I think that's pretty much, like everyone agrees with that. But the keyboard and mouse is pretty good too.
In that case, Jordan, what was your first experience with RE4? Which console did you start with?
Well, my first experience of actually playing Resident Evil properly was on the PS2, but I beat it on the Wii version. Obviously, we covered this way back when in our very first episode for the podcast series. But yeah, those were my first experiences. But as far as the actual launch and experiencing it when it first came out on the GameCube, I was in the US at the time. So what really kind of stuck out to me was just how much hype there was for this game. And it's especially crazy looking back because it came out, I think it was like the second week of January. And if you go and have a look at what 2004 was like in those last few months, it was crazy. There were so many fantastic games that came out. You had World of Warcraft, Half-Life 2, Halo 2, Metal Gear Solid 3, Metroid Prime 2, San Andreas, all within the previous sort of 3-month block.
Jeez.
And yet, most of the buzz was still about what was on the horizon with Resident Evil 4. And that's mad to me, because we obviously look at those games, and any one of those games could be, the defining game of that period, of that year, of that quarter. And yeah, there was just such a buzz about it, which I still can't quite understand it, because it's like obviously Resident Evil was popular, but this just seemed like it was on another level. So yeah, like I thought it looked, fascinating. It was compelling. The atmosphere was what first really got me hooked. It looked like nothing else, in terms of just having that presence to it, as a horror game. and kind of, really feeling like you're going to be against the odds in this title. I think as far as gameplay, it took me a little bit more time to actually acclimatize to it, which is probably why I got on better with the Wii edition as opposed to the PS2 edition. The game looked fine on the PS2. I know obviously it's considered sort of graphically the worst one, but considering it was already one of the best looking games of its time, even a downgrade still looks pretty good. But yeah, that was my first experience. It was with the Wii edition actually beating it, and yeah, it stuck with me all those years as just a near perfect experience that we'll get into.
I'm going to be that person. I'm going to stand out like a sore thumb here. Around the time for me, my Resi fandom started to dip a little bit around this period. I know I had Remake, and I played Remake, and I think I struggled with it because it was so terrifying at the time. But other than that, I missed the sort of the PS2 games, the spin-offs and Outbreak and stuff like that. So there was a lot of games that I hadn't picked up and didn't really know much about. I remember seeing all the stuff, as we mentioned, about RE4 and its other versions, and I think I just kind of got tired of waiting for it in a way, because it seemed like it was always being shown off and not necessarily coming. And then by the time we got to this sort of fever pitch, it didn't look to me like the Resident Evil that I knew. And my early memories are not playing it. My early memories are of watching it. Watching a friend who'd never played Resident Evil before start with Resident Evil 4 and just fall head over heels for it, just completely addicted. I have really strong memories of sitting in his tiny bedroom, watching him play through the campaign, play through Mercenaries, just becoming a savant at it, and me basically just not touching it. And I never like abjectly just sort of like saying no, rejecting it, just sitting there very conflicted with it the entire time, which is definitely been a feeling that I know a lot of people have had and still have, and I've wrestled with it for a long, long time, and it's going to be something throughout this podcast, definitely, where I've just sort of, I've learned to love it over time, but it took a while, because I didn't know what the hell it was compared to the games that I had obsessed over. It was difficult for me to adjust, and not necessarily as much from the gameplay perspective, although that was obviously a major, major shift, which is where I want to start, because as some of you guys have already mentioned, it was a massive, massive change in the industry. Like, Resident Evil 4's impact is pretty large. This whole over-the-shoulder thing, I mean, it'd been done a little bit before, but never to quite the same extent as this, and it spawned so many games. And as much as I sort of like, you could poo-poo it like, it's not the fixed cameras that I grew up with and all that stuff. I do like saying to people, but, you wouldn't have Gears of War, Uncharted, etc., and so on and so forth without Resident Evil 4. But it's weird going back to it now. After playing Remake 2 recently and going back to RE4, you can see the through line from that point to this point, 16 years on, but the small improvements along the way. But the basics are still there. It's still essentially the same concept in terms of sort of player perspective and stuff like that. I would say number one core thing for the gameplay is the ability to very specifically aim and target limbs. That is what the whole thing hands on, like just very specific aiming. And the whole game feels like it has been built around that, which is arguably, it's going to be a huge shift in a horror franchise, which was kind of about maybe a little bit stunted and sort of struggling a little bit with perspective and what you could do with the character. This was giving you way, way more player agency. Steve, how did you feel about the gameplay, like the big change, of course, that happened? Did you instantly click with it, or did you have to sort of wrestle with it like I have done over the years?
I think me following the pre-release trailers, even though I didn't, follow the actual development history, I was following the trailers like on GameTrailers.com, downloading some of them and watching them back. I was very much, I was like, I was on board with seeing where it went. I was kind of a bit taken aback by just the level of action focus, but I mean, by this point, we'd already had Code Veronica and RE0 throwing like arsenals. I just thought it was going to be a little bit more like that. The main thrust of it was I remember watching, I think it was Mikami himself doing a playing demo. And I remember taking away the thought of, you have a knife, like they make a point of saying you've got the knife with you all the time during this demo. And he's shooting the boxes, to which that's the thing that sticks in my head, like, why are you wasting ammunition? You need the ammunition, it's a survival horror game. So when I come to the game proper, like, no, you can just use a knife. And I kind of just got into the groove and went with it. I was wondering when bits were going to show up and when they didn't. I was like, do I need to play it as a different character? There isn't a different character. There's just mercenaries. So there was this weird, confusing honeymoon period. So I wasn't mad. I was just disappointed. But I was willing to still let them in the room. They hadn't stolen from me to buy the game, Luigi. I see that. I see the group chat. Shameful. No, I do feel there's a conflicting series of emotions when it comes to Resident Evil 4, but as it's pure game compared to mostly a developed narrative, I can live with that. Like I said, I can totally appreciate where you're coming from though, because I'm sure we're going to get to that. Narrative's a little bit wobbly.
Yeah, we'll get there, definitely. So, Adam, you were very enthusiastic about the gameplay. Is that sort of like... That's the crux, right? That's why you keep going back to it so often.
Yeah, it's such a fun game to play. I find I can just pick it up. The weird kind of like campy story, like the scripting, it just kind of adds to its replayability for me, because it's a game that doesn't, it sounds weird, but it doesn't take itself super seriously.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. It hasn't got like a really heavy storyline to it. It's just a really great experience. I would be extremely interested to see, like, if Resident Evil 4 had happened, how many of the games that it kind of spawned would be first-person shooters. Because I feel like, it's all the games that are third-person shooters could easily be first-person shooters if it wasn't for Resident Evil 4.
Yeah, fair.
The gameplay is just phenomenal, though. It was a kind of ahead of its time, like you say. Like locational aiming is so much fun in the game. In the same sense that GoldenEye was on the N64. That's another one that kind of jumps out to me for kind of being able to shoot certain areas and having the enemies react. Shooting, there's nothing more satisfying than shooting an axe out of the air as it's about to hit you and being like, sweet, and like doing it on purpose. It just feels very accomplished to do that. Gameplay wise, it's just phenomenal. When was Shenmue? What are we talking about in terms of quick time?
Something like 2001, 2002.
Okay, so
Good I think before.
Yeah, I think it does a good job with its quick time events. It's not, other than the knife fight with Krauser, which can be infuriating. Just because it changes the prompts, it's not the same every time. You never kind of really know what prompts you're going to get.
If you're really, really bad at that, actually, it eventually does just dictate to one button.
Really?
Over and over. Yeah, and I'm not going to say how I know that first time playthrough on GameCube, Steve.
I'll 100% be the guy who's like, I'm not very good at video games. Like, I'm not like really great. I don't play things on like the ultra hard modes or anything like that. But Resident Evil 4 is a game that I am good at, just from repetition. So that's definitely something that it was weird I played it for the first time on the Switch Lite, because I was like, well, I'm going to play it again, and how many ports have I got of this? But I can honestly say the Switch Lite was probably my favorite time I've ever played it.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's really fun. It just seems to go really well with that kind of like smaller screen because it is a little bit dated, so it looks really good on the small screen, and it's the first time I played it with headphones, and it is a very different experience. I was really pleasantly surprised. It's kind of a lot more creepy with the headphones in, because whenever you're in an area, the sounds aren't really like distance based. So if you go into an area and there's ganados in there, no matter where they are, you hear them in the headphones as if they're like right next to you. So
That's awesome.
it was pretty creepy to hear them going on and on. Yeah, it's really, really cool with headphones. It made it a very different experience. Just super fun. Man, I love this game. I'm just going to gush over
yeah,
it.
it's gushing. That's fine. I will also shout the praises of the Wii version. I'm happy that it came up so much that it did at the beginning, because it's the version that I usually go back to play. So when I played it in preparation for today, I played the PS2 version, which I think is quite possibly the first time I've played it, or at least a very long time, and properly on the PS2. And Steve, you mentioned this yesterday, and I don't know, I guess the Wii version doesn't have this so much because of the sort of aim and point aiming, but something that this game does wonderfully in terms of the aiming is just how all the weapons sort of feel different. When you don't have something like, I'm guessing the keyboard and mouse maybe less so as well because it's more one-to-one, but dragging the cursor around. See, that is the big thing in this game compared to sort of later games, and we'll definitely talk about the impact this game has had on the series. This game's a shooting gallery, really, but it's not an on-rails blastathon. There is some actual doing to it. You have to stop and very specifically drag your cursor. So whilst I talked about being given more player agency, they don't give you too much. And I think that's what makes it so fun. Like, you actually have to balance your movement and your aiming and the amount of time that it takes to do these things. And they know how fun the aiming is, because this game introduces stuff that never comes back as well, like the target practice mode where you can unlock the bottle caps and stuff. It's just dotted around. Why? Just to have more fun shooty aimy stuff. It's just some extra stuff to shoot for fun. And
just
like bits of
the arcade feel.
Yeah, exactly. Bits of the environment that you can shoot. There's parts we have to shoot down a drawbridge after the sort of bug nest, the restraints on Ashley that you have to do that. They just thought about, okay, aiming is fun. How can we use this in as many different ways as possible? Like specific limb targeting and enemies that need you to focus on certain parts. That's where most of the fun comes from for me. James, you played this on Wii version and on PC recently, so you have definitely a perspective on how the aiming feels, I'm sure.
Yeah. The aiming, of course, like there is like less of a weight to playing with the weapons from the Wii to the PC, but they're still there. Like on the keyboard and mouse, I can still feel it. Like each weapon does feel unique with the keyboard and mouse, which is again quite difficult because it's a keyboard and mouse. It's not that wouldn't stereotypically be something you can put weight to, but it seems to do it. Yeah, I was going to say as well that another game that came out a couple of years after this one, a couple of years after Resident Evil, that is heavily inspired and is one of the biggest earning and most entertaining games that's come out has been Gears of War, which has done so well, and it's clearly inspired by Resident Evil 4. Mm-hmm. And I love that game. I remember buying it because of Resident Evil 4 and getting the metal case, like the gun case and everything. I got the collector's edition, and I played that so much, and I couldn't wait until this next one that came out. And then it took so long for the sequel to come out that I didn't play the sequel. I haven't played the rest either. So any recommendations if I should play them or not, let me know.
Choose the best one. Fight me.
2 is good.
But yeah, back to Resident Evil though. Resident Evil 4's gameplay is super fun purely because of that limb shooting, the weight of the weapons, and I know this sounds weird because normally I am such a hater of controls. You'll see when we talk about Metal Gear Solid at the end of the month, but the controls make the game like it. Yeah, it might feel clunky, but it's just on the cusp of like being annoying, but also like crapping yourself because it's deliberately been put that way. So you have that horror aspect of it. And on top of that, like we'll talk about it later, but the music as well, and the atmosphere. I agree with Adam. The music, when you have really good headphones on and you're listening to this game and you have the music up, right? It's a different experience than like if you're playing off a TV and you're just, like you say, it's a shooting gallery. You're just shooting. And you can play it however you want as well. Like, yeah, you could just shoot people, but you could also mix up like I was doing yesterday on the PC version, which is thanks to Steve, what Steve taught me, which is shooting them in the knee, wait till they go down, kick them, and then just stab them, right? And that's a really good way of getting yourself ammo and surviving in later difficulties and stuff. And yeah, I mean, at the time it was, in terms of gameplay, I think, because was it 2004, 2005?
2005, right at the beginning of 2005.
All right, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it was the best game of that year for me. Like, and that was coming from someone who's never played Resident Evil properly before. I knew nothing about the series, and I'm going to enjoy talking. I know that the plot is kind of weak, but I'm going to enjoy talking about it because there's some things in Resident Evil 4 that are so interesting that I think maybe the ball was dropped, or maybe they're just waiting for their time. Or, you know, maybe the rumors about that, like, RE4 remake, right, are true, and they're going to try and pad that out. But, yeah, best game for me in that year, and I played it a lot on the Wii, and, like, I equally enjoyed playing it on keyboard and mouse. The only issue was Krauser. I showcased, you guys, you can watch the video, you can watch the VOD, but, man, it kept freezing with the QTEs, which meant I couldn't stab him, and I wanted to knife kill him, but I couldn't. I just blasted him, but it kept freezing with my knife. So when the QTEs came up, so I couldn't kill him. And then the only other thing was not being able to keybind the inventory buttons is a bit weird because, guys, backspace is used to move stuff around, pick it up and moving it around, and delete is used to rotate things, which is so weird, and you can't change that. It's so strange. But yeah, I would say I enjoyed it more on the PC, but I still super enjoyed it on the keyboard and mouse. And even though I say like the Wii is a better version, I think those who came to the stream yesterday seen that I was doing fine. I was doing fine with the keyboard and mouse. You have your quick turns. It's very intuitive in terms of that, and your spacebar to stab and aiming. Oh my god! Because it's mouse and keyboard, aiming on the PC is superior in every way. Right? It's just so much fun to just do consecutive shots to knee, arm, head, knee, arm, and just like sometimes I did that just for fun. Like, and because the game is giving you those tools. It was super fun to do.
It's funny that you mentioned sort of like the melee stuff, because that was obviously new for the series and something that I didn't think about a little bit. It's that's partly maybe why people were like, wow, this game is so action heavy that you can suplex parasite infested villager, which is mental. But in a lot, and we're going to get with many aspects of the game, in hindsight, this is nothing compared to what we'd see down the line for sure. Jordan, what's your... And
also the fact that the melee had a cleave as well, super satisfying. Like, more games should have cleaves. Okay, end rant.
Jordan, what's your general overview of the gameplay?
Well, I think one of the biggest sort of X factors that this game had compared to some of the other Resident Evils that came before it was that I would say that it is the most accessible in terms of difficulty. So it's the most accessible to newcomers. There's still challenge there, but there's something about the gameplay that can be not forgiving, but it's at least more open than perhaps you would have with some of the previous Resident Evils. I understand why that could be a bone of contention if you've been, up until that point, lifelong fan, and you've come to sort of have this experience of Resident Evil, of which Resident Evil 4 doesn't necessarily keep up. Now, I do think that a lot of the philosophy is still there in the design. It is still intended to be a survival horror, at least for the sort of first half of the game. But it is a lot more open. I think that's a strength, ultimately, because I think it's a sign of confidence with the developers that they're happy enough with their design that they think that they can either throw you everything that you want to use, or allow you to limit yourself and go on a really kind of tough run. There's confidence there, because there's a lot of games that don't allow that are quite restricted and have a super long list of rules that you need to abide by when you're in that game, and the experience as a whole. And Resident Evil 4 is just sort of free-flowing in that way. I mentioned before, when we've talked about Resident Evil 4 before, that it reminds me a lot, especially in the end game of Symphony of the Night, where you can have a game that is, especially it's coming from a series noteworthy for its difficulty, and some linearity when it comes to sort of progression. Now all of a sudden you can reach the final boss and be, frankly, outmatching him by a decent degree, and it can be a little bit of a dampener. But the fact is, the control is there for the player to utilize, as opposed to the game maybe just sort of pushing it on you. I mean, if your typical run is probably going to be that you have some money left over for the final boss fight, and you probably upgraded a few of your weapons, bought a few new weapons, and you'll get through it. You'll probably die a few times throughout your playthrough, but you'll do it. And that goes for sort of the average playthrough, whether you've never played a Resident Evil game before, or whether you're a veteran. But what is so cool is that you don't have to abide by those rules. I think obviously for your first playthrough you probably will, but the fact that you can kind of go back and just all of a sudden you can come up with a whole other set of like rules to impose upon yourself, I think that's like fascinating. I mean, I was talking to my friend about it the other day, and it got him wanting to sort of like boot up the game. And he's like, "I'm going to try my fish run." It's like, "Fish run? What are you talking about?" And he tells me about a way of sort of limiting the game. It's almost like a no damage run. You only use the small attaché case. You must carry a large bass fish with you, and you can only heal with fish. And if you happen to know this, there's maybe like 3 chapters and 2 areas where you can get fish, and they're really early on, so it's extremely hard. And we nicknamed it the John West run, if you fancy giving it a go. But the fact that that's there is awesome. And again, the game allows for it. You're not breaking the game by doing it. And Resident Evil has had a lot of other things Resident Evil 4 has had a lot of different new implementations thrown at it, like the Wii pointer controls. And again, it didn't break the experience. It made it easier for certain people, of course, if you didn't necessarily get on with the dot sight. But I still think that the game stands up. It design shines through. I mean, with regards to the aiming, obviously you guys have sort of covered it. It is a perfect sort of description to call it like a shooting gallery. You kind of you park up in one place and you just try and sort of like clear through the oncoming mass. I think for the most part it works really well, because it enforces the importance of shooting and the importance of aiming and being tactical with where exactly you aim. Obviously, as soon as you learn how to suplex Ganado, then that's pretty much the go-to.
Yeah, kind of.
but the fact that you have all of these different options where it comes to taking out the enemies is a new aspect, and I like that it has evolved. The actual gameplay has had to evolve in order to match that. So obviously, headshots aren't the be all and end all now, where it concerns neutralizing enemies, because all of a sudden they can spawn something that, frankly, is worse to deal with. And it's just interesting that while yes, it has criticisms for maybe being a little bit easier in certain respects, there's clearly some additions to the design that are meant to modernize it with this new over-the-shoulder viewpoint. Obviously, this was Mikami's direction, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's the only sequel that he's ever made. The only sequel he's ever directed ever in his history. He doesn't like sequels.
That's crazy. That is crazy. He obviously is very deliberate with the design of this game, which I think stands out. Obviously, it's considered by many people, if not perfect, then near perfect. And I've always felt the most important thing about a design is, intent, visible intent. It's not just about, what you're doing, but why you're doing it. Why is it there? Because I might not necessarily like an aspect of a game, but if I know why it's being done, I'm less inclined to criticize it. I personally find that, the dot sight is a little hard to get used to at first. It's a little bit different to having, an actual crosshair. Which was the standard just about everywhere else, and at first I thought, well, this is maybe worse. But having played through the Wii edition and thinking that was the way to play it, and then coming back and doing my most recent playthrough, obviously spending dozens of hours with that dot sight, I started to understand more why it was implemented in the first place, and it's obviously it's great for long distance. I mean, if your dot sight can pick something out, you can shoot at it. So it's maybe not as standard issue as a crosshair is, but it works, and I've had to warm to it. But it has its strengths, and I can't really fault that. I think if there's anything that is maybe an issue with the game, it is the QTEs. I think that QuickTime events are definitely a trademark of mid-2000s game design, and while some are okay because they're maybe not as intrusive, or maybe they have dedicated segments, there are some which just happen in the midst of cutscenes. And they're fine, but it does kind of hamper the game because it's penalizing you for effectively doing something that is down to response time, as opposed to any kind of tactics or deeper knowledge of the game or practice with the gameplay.
It's very separate from the gameplay. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can I back you?
Stuff like suplexes, that's super fun. It's something that is optional. You have a button prompt and you can do it. Other things like jumping out the window and all of those cool little moments where it'll sort of cut away at a stylish angle. It's great. It's empowering. But yeah, the QuickTime events are really one of the only things that is holding this game back for me to call it a 10 out of 10. It's like it's almost there. But because the QuickTime events are there throughout the game, that's the only thing that really kind of pulls it down. But everything else is it's so purposeful. I mean, the level design's great. It's great in the way that it limits you in combat, so that because Resident Evil is trademarked by close hallways and rooms which may only have one exit. you still kind of feel like that rat in a maze, while also being pursued by a horde of zombies coming from all different kinds of directions. But the level design is really rewarding. You can go off branch and you can go somewhere else that may not necessarily lead anywhere that is important to the plot or important to sort of the progression of the game. But you'll still be rewarded for going down there. You'll get an extra item, or
Find the Magnum.
you might find a shortcut to the merchant and stuff like that. They're just up and down, this game has clearly been given so much attention and love. And that's obviously why it still stands up so well after all these years, because you can come back to it and it's still a very solid experience. And yeah, bar QTEs, it has not aged a great deal. It still stands out, still a classic.
So, Owlet, do you have a defense of the QTEs, or are you
No.
Yeah.
It was the back Jordan up. I just put it in chat, but it was like, you make a good point. I can't remember any of the cutscenes. Like, and I played this game a lot, and it's because it's the cutscenes with the QTEs, and it's only because I'm too focused on clicking those QTEs to actually know what's happening. And I mean, I just wanted to back that up, because it's just, when you're taking the experience away when you could just have given us a cool cutscene.
Right. The one that always springs to mind for me is the sort of trap door with the spikes in it. I want to sit back and enjoy the B-movie silliness here. I don't want to suddenly be jumping forward and trying to jam on Square and X, because, it kind of comes out of nowhere. There was a lot in there, Jordan, that I absolutely agree with. Stuff about it being open, you're 100% right. Like, that's a Resident Evil thing to some extent anyway. Obviously, the knife-only runs just evolved organically. It was not something that was expected to happen, and obviously you can do that in this game too. And you can do fish runs, apparently, as we've just learned. But like the choice of weapons as well. Like, with the attaché case, you only have so much that you can take with you. So you pick what weapons you're going to take. You're only going to find a couple just sort of naturally on your journey, I think. But then you choose to purchase the rest and upgrade them how you like, which obviously was brand new for the series as well, and how you fit them into your attaché case to make it work. You can take loads of weapons if you want and not have much space for healing items and grenades and such, or you can say, no, I only need the red 9. If you're playing certain versions, you take the bolt action rifle because it's the most powerful gun in the game, because they accidentally capped it wrong. So you've got total choice if you want to take shotguns and TMPs, or if you want to go. I find handguns and rifles just wonderfully satisfying to use. So the rifle is always pretty close to the top of the attaché case for me. I'm always dipping into that one. But you get that choice, definitely, 100%, which is, blowing it wide open, this game. And you talked a little bit about sort of it being somewhat inviting. Anyone can kind of finish it. And Steve, you were talking off mic before we started recording about the sliding difficulties as well. Easy, normal, professional, but it's not rigid.
No, chances are if you've played normal and you are consistently, should I say, decent at the game, you're fighting, you're winning, you're not dying, you've actually been playing on professional for a good chunk of that. So if you're ever intimidated by hard modes and things, give yourself some credit. You've been playing probably at a higher level than you even think you are. The only version of RE4, the easy mode's the one that basically reaches, imagine a slider of 1 to 10. Easy only goes from 0 to 5, and normal and professional are both capable of going on to, I think, like, normal's got the full gamut of 0 to 10, and professional is like, it starts at 10, can go all the way back down to 5. So, you have been playing at a reasonable level the entire time. It basically boils down to every hit you make, every hit you take, and continues will dictate various things about ammo and health. It's probably why when you watch, like, speedrunners play this game, they will intentionally get themselves hit or even killed and somehow get a faster time. And obviously, if you play on easy mode, it chops sections of the game out for you. Like, you don't do the maze. I don't believe you do half of the U3 fight. You can just, like, walk through those cages. It's different.
I asked some members of our Discord server for sort of their reactions and memories of RE4. And actually, just talking about the game so much over the last week and a bit has definitely driven some people to play it again for the first time in however long. So I'm going to read some of those sort of scattered throughout this episode. The first one comes from Mr. KDB, who says, when it first came out, I really did like it a lot. I was so excited for it that is what made me get a GameCube. He got the silver RE4 one. I have that one as well, so shout out to that wonderful bit of kit. However, at the time, I did feel like the game was way over the top for the franchise, story and gameplay. I much preferred mansions, hunters, city street, zombies, lickers and Birkin over the hyper-realistic European setting castle and things like El Gigante. We'll get there, trust me. That being said, I did enjoy it, but I think my favourite part was always the opening village, and in particular Chainsaw Dude. My feeling now is that it has aged pretty terribly in terms of the controls, worse than the first three because of the fixed camera seems to work better with tank controls than over the shoulder. It did perhaps take the series in a direction it never should have gone. It walked the line between survival horror and action, but after that the line was pretty clearly crossed. RE4 is still quite creepy in parts to this day, but gameplay wise it's a bit of a headache. I can sort of see where it's coming from, because when I step back on it, especially after so much time sort of being acquainted with the Wii version, that's always been my go-to. Adapting to having the laser sight, it does take a little bit of time, as previously mentioned, and the camera can be a bit tricky. I mean, this is a brand new playstyle, so I suppose you have to go a little bit easy on it. They were still trying to figure it out, but there are some moments with the camera that are not great, and I know in particular Mr. KDB struggled because he was streaming it, and seeing him miss point blank shots because of the camera was not nice to watch. But yeah, I don't know, RE4 is a bit of a weird one because it can be a struggle when you start picking it back up, but by the time you get to the end and you got your head around it, I feel like it does get easier. I guess that's true of all video games, to be fair, but there's a little bit of a learning curve, especially going back to it as well and sort of casting off some of the quality of life improvements, which, to be fair, is actually something that I love about RE4, because alright, so going in and out of the inventory is it takes a little bit too long. I mean, on the PS2 especially, it's probably better in later ports, but it dragged a little bit. But the thing is, if you iron that issue out, give yourself a weapon change button, that's taking away some of the sort of restriction that's inherent in this game that makes it good. That's when you start sliding in that direction that Mr. KDB mentioned, I think. So I know that's not necessarily what he was talking about. The camera is another thing altogether, but that's just a thought that I had in terms of intentional restrictions. I'm glad that later ports haven't tried to change things like that, like added in a weapon wheel or something.
Yeah, I disagree with you there. I did a whole video on it on the First Day Spray YouTube channel.
True.
I think increasing accessibility and less menu diving is always a good thing. But I will recede that comment. I'm not going to cause a division in the podcast.
What I will say about that, though, if you're going to do that, you have to balance it elsewhere. So if you were going to include that in a remake or something, then you would have to make sure it actually works, and don't just put it in, separate and expect it all to work. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I mean, my idea, basically, if you listen to this podcast, go on First Aid Spray, look up 5 additions that I'd make to RE4, and it's a very different thing because I don't want a remake. You see, kids, I would like a similar to how most Doom games are treated by the community now, where they just add little tweaks here and there. Like if you look into Doom, there's so many different fan engines that have done adding jumping or just simple things like rooms over rooms. And the thrust of it is, I think the game doesn't need a remake. It could do with a few toggleable, modern conventions for accessibility's sake.
World War Phil also chimed in about the camera. I want to shout out his little paragraph that he sent in. He says, I really like it, but I was quite late to the party, so I didn't really get the whole wow factor. It's still a great experience, though, but I agree that the moving camera is definitely not a good fit with tank controls. Does anybody have any defense or anything to say about the camera, really? Because it seems like a lot of people were hung on that one in particular, and we haven't mentioned it so far.
There is some problems with it. Like even on keyboard and mouse, where you can just force it. It likes to readjust overly so. Also, sometimes the camera just forces focus on certain things when you don't want it to. and like it's like for those spike rooms that have the the Jill sandwich kind of trap.
Yeah.
It forces your perspective, and it's super frustrating because then it will switch back, and then it will switch back up to the room, and you're like, I didn't want to go this direction. Could you send me back, please? Just the auto fixing and having to drag it back and stuff. That is a problem. Yeah,
that's fair.
I think there's a bit of issue with sort of a peripheral vision when it comes to aiming. Obviously, it's meant to be a more narrowed vision so that you can focus on what's ahead of you. But let's say that you are positionally not sitting in a corner or camped somewhere where enemies are not coming from the sides. You are going to possibly have an issue where there's an enemy that's coming up that you don't necessarily spot. I mean, a good example of this is the truck sequence when Ashley is driving the truck, and you're basically trying to find the right position on the back of that truck to be able to see everything. And I don't think it's possible because, quite frankly, I would just have the odd Ganado that would just obviously drop down from the top, and you don't really get much notice. And depending on where you're looking, you won't even necessarily see in the peripheral. Obviously, for the most part, with regards to aiming and shooting, you do typically have to reposition yourself. It's almost like you let the enemies come close enough, and then you find somewhere else to kind of go stand and actually do your shooting, which is probably a bit of compensation from the player's end for that restriction with the camera. It's the only time that it really comes up as an issue, and I put a lot of hours into this recent playthrough because I was just enjoying it so much. So it clearly didn't hamper my experience enough to stop me from playing it. I just wanted to bring back a former point about the weapon switching, because I did think about that. Obviously, Resident Evil 5 addresses this to some extent by mapping weapon and item switching to the D-pad. That's obviously one way to go. But I will say, in Resident Evil 4's defense, the menu is incredibly snappy. If you go and press start or Y or whichever system you're on, whichever takes you to the attaché case, I think it's really snappy. It's really quick to actually get into that menu, select what you want, and get back out. I didn't really get hung up on anything, and I think that stands out. Go on, Steve.
I need to chime in here because obviously the fade in and out of the menu on modern systems this is fine. But on the PS2, that can actually leave you a massive disadvantage.
Really?
Like there is a good half-second fade in, and the game is still running, but on the fade back in, so you may not see, say, a hatchet has been thrown.
I can't say that I noticed it because I did switch between when I was trying to decide which version I was actually going to play to replay this game for the podcast. I switched between the GameCube one and the Xbox One version. I didn't personally notice a difference. But fair enough. PS2 edition could be quite different. But I think for the most part, it seems like it's quite snappy and sort of you can get back out. Plus, you start to kind of learn the location of everything in your attaché case for the most part. And so
the only reason
you start getting a bit of a muscle memory to switch back over. Once you're in that menu, okay, go down, right, and there you go. You got TMP equipped again.
And I say the only reason I bring it up is because it's really the only version that's affected.
Right.
The benefit of the PS2 version is the laser sight. You could it's the most opaque it's ever going to be in the series. So yeah, give with one, take away with another. Really.
So let's round out the gameplay discussion because there's still a lot to talk about. Any final thoughts on any particular gameplay elements?
I mean, I feel like everyone's talking about the QTEs and things, and I've been racking my brain ever since it's come up, and it's for me obviously this is very simple. It's like getting into a car and just going. RE4 I can just roll with it, same as if I put remake on or whatever. But the only time QTEs are ever really a problem for me, it feels like it's more in the boss fight sections or literally the cutscenes. The actual thrust of the gameplay, where you're just Leon versus Ganados or fighting the protecting Ashley rather. It never really comes up that much except for your bonus attacks, your melee attacks. It's strange. I think to dial it back a little bit further, I did say how I took to water rather well. I think it may be because of there was a few games that actually did ape, like almost like Proto RE4 style. There's like a game on the PS2 called Extermination, which literally was over the shoulder and with a laser sight. This is like launch PS2 era, so it's a few years ahead. But this for me, like I can chop and change between them. So I guess this might be a Steve privilege thing. I can't see where half you people are coming from. I feel like you're overblowing it a little. No, I'm kidding. I can see how it would alienate some people, but I do feel like some people blow it a little out of proportion.
I do think that maybe it's a hindsight, kind of situation, perhaps.
I see more of RE4 taking from its original counterparts of remake back than I do anything that takes from RE4 onwards.
Interesting.
5 has strafing added in, and 6 goes even further to full 3D motion, and then you get to remake 2, and the camera angle's the same, but the way you actually execute combat is a bit more. It's all about focusing your aiming really, and hoping for a crit, or just blasting the leg and running on. If you watch the speedrunners, it just feels very strange. Anyway, that's my ramble done.
No, it's fine. Adam has been suspiciously quiet. Are you waiting to gush again, Adam?
Yeah, I'm trying to hold everything in.
No, let it out.
I will agree somewhat on the QTEs. And honestly, my main issue with them, just like James was saying, is that you can't until you're really familiar with when they're coming. Now I know when they're all coming, so I can kind of watch the cutscenes. But you kind of end up just focusing on the bottom of your screen where they pop up, so you don't really get to watch, the cutscenes at first. So that's definitely a small detraction from the game, but not one that I feel like is a huge issue. I think that as we look from where we are now, I feel like Resident Evil 4 has a lot more in common with 1, 2, and 3 than, even though the the style of gameplay, you still have the static shooting, somewhat tank controls. It, as you look back retrospectively, it kind of is a bridge between.
It's interesting because it felt like a big jump at the time.
It did, but now it feels less. I mean, obviously, it's a very different aesthetic. But gameplay-wise, I feel like it's still somewhat similar.
It's funny because I almost think that maybe Capcom just thought, that was a big jump in people's eyes, and it affords them to make bigger jumps with every entry, almost.
Right. And I think that the game is not a survival horror game for me. Survival horror is a very specific tag, and it 100% relates to Silent Hill and the earlier Resident Evils. Has a very specific feeling. I would say this is more, to just coin a new kind of term, action anxiety game. It's obviously an action game, but no matter how much I play it, there are anxiety inducing areas. And they will always be. The way it's built is built you kind of run up to an area, you earn a bunch of ammo along the way, and then there'll be an area where you kind of use up most of your ammo, and then you repeat. You've obviously got the house, you've got where you're kind of ambushed, but there's a lot of different little things that are just really anxiety ridden, like the room where you get 2 of the blind guys with claws in the castle. That's a super anxiety room. Always the claw guys are anxiety. There's a really bad one when you go into in the nicely furnished. Let's talk about aesthetics later, because there's so many different aesthetics. There's so many different. But the room you go into where the cage drops and one of the claw guys drops in with you, and the doors are padlocked.
Yep.
anxiety
I
right
died.
there. Yep. I mean, it's so easy to die there, but there's so many little anxiety areas like that. It's so cool.
So you've nicely led me on to what I want to talk about next, which is the enemy roster. And those guys are the Garradors, by the way. Just one of many fantastic fantastic enemies in this game. I think it's Resident Evil has been pretty strong with its enemy rosters in every single entry up to this point. I mean, RE1 is legendary, RE2 had stuff like the Licker, 3 had Nemesis, of course, 0 is perhaps the most lacking, but even still there's definitely a lot of original stuff that had not appeared before. RE4 is it's just as strong, especially from a gameplay point of view. Chainsaw Man, Garrador, the Regenerators, Iron Maidens, Verdugo, stuff like that. We can definitely go around the room and talk about them. But this is, again, one of those things where it's still a confusing feeling where it's like, the enemy designs and fighting against them is cool. But one thing that I still don't like about the Resident Evil 4 sort of kicked off for the series is, what are the backstories of any of these things? Like El Gigante, I still don't like it because what is it? Why is it? Is it a naturally occurring thing? Why does it die when the Plagas is served? Was the Plagas put in it and then it became... Like, they don't explain any of it, and it kind of sucks compared to the other games where there is pseudo-science behind it. For this, it's just like, cool, you need a boss fight against a giant, which, okay, fine. But they've never gone back and tried to explain it particularly well, which is kind of a shame. I remember one of the big points of contention for me about the game, one of the things that turned me off the most was kind of the lack, and with the story, this is kind of ties in with the story when we get there, but the lack of zombies. Now you're fighting against these villagers who talk, and that was a big thing. I was like, oh, the enemies talk. They talk in Spanish and stuff. It was 100% the right call. Ridiculous to say otherwise. It adds to the atmosphere so much. But at the time, I was like, what the hell is this? Fighting random dudes wielding knives and stuff. I to this day, I still prefer stuff like the Molded from RE7, big, stalky, goopy, horrible looking things that don't really say a whole lot and just scary in their presence. But for RE4, it just wouldn't succeed without the Ganado, at least. So, as much as I had like an unsure feeling back then, they're a huge part of it. Any particular
standouts? You want a little less conversation, a little more action.
Exactly. A little less conversation and a little less action, actually. James, any particular standout enemies for you?
I think what's cool about this game is that every enemy has its time. Even when you first go to the village, it's each one of those are they Ganados? Each one of those Ganados they're not Ganados at that point, really, are they? They're Ganados when it turns to night and they're like gremlins, but reversed.
I guess they're always
Ganados.
They've always got the Plagas in them, so.
But yeah, they have all are pretty unique in how they interact with you and and they feel. It feels like a village. It feels like a small village is fighting you, which is cool. Then you got your chainsaw dude, which
for sure.
On the keyboard and mouse version, for some reason, on the PC version, I never had a problem with chainsaw dudes, but on console, oof! Like I was scared of them. Dr. Salvador, right?
Mr. Salvador, yeah.
Mr. Salvador,
is it Dr. Salvador? I don't know.
Doctor.
It's Dr. Salvador.
Mr.
Sorry,
Salvador
he didn't go get
is
that
the one that
PhD.
appears in Mercenaries.
Mr. Salvador is my father.
But yeah, those like on PC, I never had an issue with them, but on controller, I did. So they were kind of a non-factor for me. And I have the same issues with you, Sai. However, this is why I feel like there was a direction, and I know this we'll probably talk about it later. But there was a lot of time before this game came out, and there was a lot of debate behind the scenes with this game, and you can tell it by the monster designs, by the plot, right? That they were planning to go somewhere else with this. Right, because there are quite a few monsters in this game, and they're all pretty interesting to look at. El Gigante looks like a cave troll from Lord of the Rings,
100%,
right? And it's super interesting, but also just we don't know anything about them other than just being super extra. And And then Verdugo's super cool. I think Verdugo, the Verdugos or Verdugai, I don't know, but they are probably my favorite monster in this because they're so gross looking, but also super sleek and unique in the game itself, like the way you fight it.
That just shouts out to your love of Alien.
I was about to say, big shock, right?
It does, but we all know that Resident Evil's been inspired by Alien.
Yep.
Don't at me. But yeah, like I love the Vertigos. The Blade Boys. Same with like they've all got names, guys. In my head, okay, my head canon. Blade Boys. They, when I first faced one in that single room with Ashley, I forgot to just pause her by the door outside. Yeah. And she got murdered by him, and I was like, "Oh, I remember these guys now." But yeah, I love the monster design in this game. I just wish there was a little bit more information about them,
for sure.
Because they're so interesting, right? I mean, that shows something. When you can just throw zombies at us and stuff, right? I mean, that's what the original games did, right? But we got history on them, we got origins of them. Right, so we can fall in love with them more. It's that these monsters are so interesting, again, like the original games, but we don't know anything about them, so we can't really talk about them much. And we'd love to. We can make our own canon about them if we want, but yeah, it just be nice to know a little bit more about them.
Could be a thing for the remake. Who knows? Adam, any particular standout enemies for you that you have affection for? Maybe affection is the wrong word. But
no, it's definitely affection. Yeah, almost all of them. Honestly, it's just, again, it's what makes the game great. Everything adds into one package, and the enemies are no different. The Ganados are like a legit threat when you're first playing, and as you become more experienced, the threat outside of like the quote unquote anxiety rooms, the threat turns into fun. It's endlessly fun to kill them. The boss fights are all pretty decent, in my opinion. Maybe the Salazar one is a bit for me, but the rest are really great. Verdugo is 100% a standout. Love fighting that guy. It's fun to freeze him as well, and then he feels like a legit threat, which is nice, even when you're good at the game.
Yeah.
No one's spoken about the amazing regenerators yet. Those things are flipping nightmare fuel, especially the ones that have the parasite on their back. Just a great mechanic there, and if you for some reason if you're new to it and you haven't bought the rifle, you're like, oh, how do I deal with these things? Obviously that's
excessive
not a problem.
Force.
Yes, grenades and just filling them with TMP bullets.
Yep.
The Iron Maidens, as the real Ark Thompson mentions in the chat, the spiky boys. There's only a couple of those in the game, but they're super cool.
You must remember, though, with the regenerators to combine the infrared scope and not do what I did, although where I got the infrared scope and was like, oh yeah, I have to combine this, and then realised all these stocks and the scopes that I had bought throughout the game, I hadn't actually bothered to combine them at any point.
Any of them.
And they were just sitting there. That was clever of me. A bit too late by that point, but never mind.
That's amazing. You're just like filling up your inventory with
for no reason. Oh well.
Yeah, I might sell this later. Yeah, but that's super cool. I love the variations on the parasite. That's another little touch where it's like they could have just done one, where the guy's head blows up and then suddenly you've got the swingy appendage with the blade on it. But they did a few different ones, like the weird spider one and the one that just eats your head. Super cool. It's so much fun to, like, little things like if a parasite's out, you can get a bunch of them out and then just throw a flash grenade and it just kills them all, which is super cool. And it's funny because James clued me up to something that I had never even thought about in the lore. Because I just thought it was just like a difficulty spike when the first parasite sort of blasts out of the guy. It's when it's nighttime. You don't get any during the day, and the flash grenade kills them. So they clearly have a big aversion to like light, which I had never thought about before. I just thought that they popped out because you got to a certain point in the game. But it's kind of got, there is a little hidden lore. It's like Dark Souls. There's hidden lore in there.
That's right, guys. Resident Evil 4 is like Dark Souls when it comes to lore, guys.
Yeah, exactly.
All you got to do is collect all the weapons, and you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Right. Just to piggyback on this ridiculous point, I mean, there are themed runs of Dark Souls as there are themed runs, like the John West run, as we have established.
The fish-only run, yeah.
The connections do run deep. There's a castle in Dark Souls as well. Help me out here.
I love the fact also that, like, Leon doesn't learn to suplex until he gets to the castle. He's like, right, it's time to pull out the suplex. Like, I'm sick of kicking stuff.
Yeah, his feet starts to hurt by that point, so he's like,
right. But yeah, I mean, just there's not a gigantic amount of enemies in this game. It's mostly variations on the Ganado.
I was going to ask everyone to sort of like pick a favorite, but we've pretty much listed everything at this point.
Yeah, the little Novistadors, the bugs are kind of cool.
Now we have
the room, the big kind of cavern room where they fly around is just a flipping nightmare.
I mean, what does stand out at least is that this game doesn't have crows that attack you, so that's a plus.
Yeah, that's nice.
You have just brought back about the Novistadors, which I didn't care for, just because. Flying enemies with that aiming, probably a little bit more frustrating. But yeah, I think you guys have kind of covered it. Verdugo does stand out as probably one of the best bosses, and that's partly down to the environment itself and the nature of that fight. You can't go anywhere, so you're really just sort of buying time. I like that there can be sort of different approaches to it, or you could just buy a rocket launcher and kablooey, it's fine doing it that way too.
Yeah, like you say, plenty of choices. You can not kill it as well. You can just leave it there if you really want.
Yeah. One that I don't think has been mentioned is the suits of armor that are particularly in the Ashley section, which is pretty cool and it's pretty freaky because they're set up in the level. You have to walk past all of them before they ever sort of come to life, and by the time they do, you're just kind of like, I knew it. I knew they were going to come to life. I knew they were going to come after me. Obviously, they make an appearance during Leon's campaign as well, and they can be pretty annoying just because you're better off sort of trying to get them all grouped together, but in the process of doing that, especially in the rooms that you're facing them in, it's really hard to round them up because they've all got big swords or axes, and they can easily kind of lop a decent amount off your health. So they stand out. Obviously, regenerators are still one of the scariest enemies that I've faced, not just in Resident Evil, but just in any game. Even though there's tactics to taking them out, which are relatively straightforward, I still just remember my first experiences with the regenerator. And especially that first experience works so well because you have no idea how this enemy works. You already did see it was established. You see it there on the operating table. But then it's one of those moments. Resident Evil has a lot of these moments which are almost designed just to completely expend your arsenal out of panic. Because you'll see an enemy and you just think, what's going to work against it? And so you use everything against it. And then realize that there was actually meant to be a strategy, and you've lost like half your grenades or all of your handgun ammo, and that's just the game just messing with you because it's going to be like, right, well, you found that really tough, didn't you? Yes, I did. Well, there's 3 more down the hallway. So that one in particular stands out. I mean, I think probably one of the weakest ones is Sadler at the end. compared to everything else, it is a bit of a step down, and maybe that's just because, for the most part, the odds are you're going to go into that fight easily outmatching him. Even if you just have your standard weapons, you probably got an attaché case big enough with enough ammunition that you could, easily expend it all and win it convincingly. But that's the only one, and I kind of threw so many great bosses at me throughout the game that I didn't necessarily worry about it that much. But it's always the bit of the sort of slightly bitter aftertaste to the game when you get to Sadler, and it's just kind of it's over pretty quickly, and then you're given the rocket launcher, and that's it. That's the end of the game.
Steve, any standout enemies or, in fact, boss fights?
While I agree that everyone's lampooning and saying how a bit pants Sadler is, I just want to say that it's one of the few arenas in the game where most things you can do throughout the entirety of the game you can do there. Like there's exploding barrels, there's contextual attacks, you can do PT dodges. I feel like it's more of a right. You have all of these tools at your disposal. Go ham and batter him. But to dial it back to monsters I really like, I think everyone's like Verdugo, Regenerator. I like them all. Like they've all left their mark on me in some way, shape, or form. I think the only one I really don't care for is the Gatling gun Ganado, JJ. Yeah. It just is a bit doesn't jive well with the rest of the enemies. I know everyone says Chainsaw Guys ain't nothing but that, but this is the first game where they were introduced, and they have been in pretty much every new entry, some way, shape, or form since.
Yeah.
And I still get anxiety from power tools as a result. I don't care what any of you all say. That chainsaw rev is terrifyingly iconic. Like the fact that you can go through 2 campaigns of RE6 before one turns up, and then it's just you facepalm, go, oh great, it's this bleep again. It gets to me like in a fun way, but yeah, and this is like at the time the bosses themselves were all a little bit more intricate than what we were used to. I mean, we have to remember back Code Veronica and back that most of the bosses were step away from it a fair bit, fire a powerful shot, either fire another one or back up a bit. That's literally all you had to do. With the exception of like Code Veronica's chuck a crate at him, it's a little bit more complex, and I feel like Verdugo is obviously the standout, but even something as like simple as Del Lago, technically the first boss fight of this game, you don't even use any of the mechanics you've used. You have to like steer a boat and lob infinite harpoons. If you by the way, listener, if for some reason you're struggling with that, just aim down and throw, directly down and throw. You're going to hit it, except for that one time it charges at you. Easy.
It's way harder on PC though. Can I just say?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why it's harder on PC because you'd think it would be easier, but for some reason they ramp up the sensitivity of the mouse on the harpoon throw, and I don't know why.
Weird.
I want to try a missed opportunity very briefly, and it's the fact that you climb up and down. This is because we've been playing Metal Gear, probably it's stuck in my head. The fact you have to climb up and down Salazar's statue, Salazar gear, if you will, and and all it is relegated to is a QTE compared to the boss fight with Salazar themselves. Bit of a shame. I would have rather have fought a giant robot Salazar with him inside it. As you dial back to the KDB guest podcast about villains, we kind of established he's a bit of a movie fan, bit of a crazy type for that kind of thing with all the traps in his castle. So that's a missed opportunity for me. But again, that may be having played Metal Gear Solid is rubbing off on my conscience.
Mobile suit Salazar.
Yeah.
Fair point.
I give one more shout out for an enemy, and that I think is a little bit underrated, and that is the shield wielding Ganados. Just on their own, they're not necessarily a big threat, but when you're dealing with a group, especially if you're in a room where they can flank you, you can easily find yourself overwhelmed if you don't take those out early. Because obviously once they get close, they can use the shield to barge you. You can take off a decent amount of damage. And obviously the whole idea is that they're trying to kind of block from kind of shooting at them in any way that would bring them down quickly. Obviously, if you've got the rifle, you can rip a hole right through them, right through the shield, right through the head, right through the shield and the head of the person behind them as well.
Yep.
But
it's always satisfying. Just to segue. That's yeah.
But the amount of times late in the game that I would end up being tripped up by one of those guys was sort of surprising. So they can be annoying once they're in the numbers. Plus, if you're in a section and you've got Ashley, and you're busy fighting on one side of the room and Ashley's over the other side of the room, or even if one of those shield guys gets in between you, all of a sudden they're protecting Ashley. you can't shoot them because they've got their shield towards you. That's pretty annoying. And then they turn around and they just bash her anyway.
It's a testament to the game, though. Like, when you think about it, the boss fights, while they're nice little spicy peaks and troughs, the base enemies are generally more of a challenge. Like, when you think of hard rooms in RE4, they're never the bosses. It's like the wrecking ball room, the water room, the cabin fight.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
100%. Like, I have more difficulty with any of those than I do fighting Verdugo, as great as he is.
The one where the excuse me, the one where the painting lifts up to reveal like the two rocket launcher guys. The start of that fight, you have like 4 of the scythe wielding guys. They're always a pain. Like when they throw the scythes, they just wreck your health.
I love that they throw scythes as well. It's so funny to me.
Cartoonishly spinning as they go across the room.
Again, another monster that's extra.
Yeah, I mean, the hatchets have like a parabolic trajectory, and 9 times out of 10 they can't throw them for diddly and just miss. But the scythe, the whirling death thing, can go for a good 10 meters.
Yeah, it's like freaking 6 feet long as well. So it's just like...
They're definitely extra. Definitely extra. And we're about to talk about the story, which is on a similar
Before
note.
we do that, we got to talk. We've forgotten about the best enemy in the game, and that is the single Ganado in the village wearing Leon's coat after you get caught.
He's so happy.
He has his own little jacket. I love that little touch. That's hilarious.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I did actually just wanted to quickly lump on with Salvador there. And I agree, because that sound, he's still threatening, because you know he's capable of that one-hit KO if he gets close enough. Was such a big deal at the time. And we talked about this on Box Art Study Part 2, way back in Season 1. How he was such a big part of the marketing. You know, we talked about how he's on the box in many regions. In fact, the European boxes, he's the only character on it. You know, he's front and center. They made those, we haven't talked about them, but the chainsaw controllers for the GameCube and the PS2, because of how big a part of the marketing he and the chainsaw was. Such a strange thing, and it has inspired this weird series of power tool enemies from here on out. 5, and it has the giant hammer wielding Magini, I guess. Both Revelations games have them, and they start to become like organic chainsaws at that point. Even RE7,
Jack Baker's ultimate chainsaw.
Right, RE7 has the chainsaw fight as well as a nod to it. So basically what I'm saying is Village is probably going to have a werewolf with a giant novelty screwdriver or something. I want to see a soldering iron if we have to have a power tool, but otherwise I'm tired of it. But he's the OG.
I want a jackhammer.
I was tired when Revelations had a biological grinder saw.
Yes. Yeah. There's one in RE6 where like all the creature's internal organs are inside its arm, which is also a chainsaw. It's nuts. Hello survivors, Sai here. Thank you for listening to part 1 of our 3-hour special on Resident Evil 4. That's right, so big you've only hit the halfway point. In our second part we talk about the game's story, aesthetics, legacy, ports, the potential of a remake and so on, and that's immediately available right now in all of your podcast feeds and on YouTube as well. If you're watching this on YouTube, it will appear on the screen around about now, so click that to continue with this huge discussion. Thank you guys.